Just a couple of months ago, I worked a pretty late shift one night. Left the office around 2 a.m. and have a 30-minute drive home. I live pretty far out in the woodland areas of the country. Forests directly on both sides of the road. I was casually driving along through the fog and out of nowhere, a kid's rubber ball, the basketball-sized ones with cartoons on them, comes bouncing out in the middle of the road from the trees. I slammed on my brakes and swerved to miss because I thought for sure a kid was bound to be chasing behind it. Never seen a soul step out. As I drive on by and started thinking, what would a kid be doing out playing this late? Then I remembered there were no houses around where this happened. Someone had to have thrown it in the road. The height it came onto the road, and at the way it bounced, the wind simply didn't blow it in front of me. It was pretty creepy. I'm assuming somebody threw it out in the road for me to get out and check it, only for me to be grabbed and potentially kidnapped. Who knows? I worked as a trucker for a year or so, and had some weird experiences. I'm probably late, but oh well, I'll share my story anyway. One of the strangest things I saw was just off the Trans-Canada in BC. It was surprisingly dead on the road I was on. Nobody going in either direction. Which was weird, even for a Wednesday in the wee hours of the morning. I found a corner and see a pillar of smoke. My initial thought is, that explains the no traffic. I start to slow down since it's kind of a blind corner, and see that there is only one car off the ditch, fire blazing. I pull off the road to see if anyone is injured and can't see anyone. On the other side of the clearing is, no joke, 4 or 5 black bears standing on their back legs. As I notice them, they all begin roaring just crazily, like I intruded some sort of party or something. I back away into my truck and watch as they calm down and continue to watch the fire. What the hell happened that morning, I'll never know. Bears are weird. This is in continuation with the last bear story. So again, I'm in the Banff area doing some hiking with friends. We are doing the usual deal. Our backpacks have cans, so we are allowed to try and scare off any bears. Well, we start taking pictures because we have a gorgeous view and, selfies. Well, we start to realize we hadn't really been loud in a while, and we're even eating, which we definitely shouldn't have been. Out of the woods strolls up this bear, and it stops and does kind of a hind leg sit like some cats do. I have never ever heard a bear make this sound, but I swear this is the only thing I can relate it to. The bear laughed at us. It sat there and laughed at us as we sat still, scared. One of my friends in selfie pose as he waits for the bear to leave. Eventually, the awkwardness makes us laugh with the bear. The bear must have found this not so funny because he then let out a massive roar, which quickly shut us up. He then laughed again and left. Fucking bears, man. Last winter, I worked as a night route driver for a medical courier service. Basically, I drive way out to rural clinics, pick up biological samples from the drop box, and then drive them back into town and ship them to a lab via the 24-hour Kinkos. My route was the same 4 nights a week, but on Thursday, the 5th night of my work week, I had one additional stop. A vet's office out in the middle of nowhere. It added about an hour onto my run just because of how far it was. I seriously don't know how they stayed in business because I only passed like 2 houses on the way out there. Anyway, it's around 1 a.m. in the morning and I'm heading out to my last stop. the vet's office out in BFE. I get there, park, leave my car running as always, go around to the side of the building, collect the sample, head back to the car, and freeze as I see something rifling through the front seats through the open driver's side window. I think I'm being robbed in the middle of nowhere. My phone is in the cup holder, and I'm about to shit my pants when this thing stops, looks over at me, and then hauls ass back into the woods at the side of the driveway. It had to have been a bear, but it ran on 2 feet. I know bears can walk bipedally, so I'm sure that's what it was, but some little part of me thinks I saw something else. After that, I always drove my car right up to the drop box, so I didn't even have to get out when I made that pickup. Not my personal experience, but my uncle lives deep in rural Oregon. He told me this story where he was driving to work really early in the morning to a small town about 30 minutes away. There was a bit of traffic just outside of town, so he stopped behind another car. There was super heavy fog this morning, like Silent Hill quality, really thick, so he could just see the backlights of the car in front of him. After following the car very slowly for a while, the car stops once more in the traffic. My uncle sits there and waits for about 20 minutes. The car still hasn't moved. All he can see is the headlights in front of him. Eventually, he gets out to see what's the matter. When my uncle gets out and walks to the car in front of him, he sees the entire front of the car completely totaled. Inside was the dead driver. The back part of the car was completely fine, and my uncle did not even know a thing was wrong earlier due to the fog. This story has always unsettled me when I had to drive in fog myself. I was once driving back from northern Western Australia at about 11 o'clock at night, and I noticed this red light off in the distance, hanging just above the horizon in my side mirror. I checked it again and again for about 2 hours, and it just hung there, following us, no matter how many times or turns or hills we went over. I decided to stop at a rest spot for a stretch of something to eat. I walked to the road and looked back to see the light was still there, just hanging a little off the top of the road. I pointed it out to my dad, who had woken up, and he couldn't make top or tails of it. I never did find out what it was, and nor have I ever seen anything like it again. I was driving cross country on my way home to Maine. I'd have enough interstate driving and decided to take back roads the rest of the way home when I got to New Hampshire. So I'm way out in the boondocks, past the White Mountains, when I see the most effed up and hilarious thing of my whole life. Up ahead was a small human on a shitty old tricycle, waving back and forth on the road. I slowed down as to not hit them, and as I went by at a crawl, I had to rubberneck several times. It was what appeared to be a midget, and had a beard, was dressed like an elf in medieval-type clothes and even a pointy hat. He was wearing dark glasses and was tapping along the road with a wooden stick. So yeah, it was apparently a blind gnome on a tricycle. I'd been driving all day but didn't feel tired at all. I think it was just some midget with an awesome sense of humor scaring people. Or maybe he was just crazy. I was once driving late night from San Antonio to Houston down I-10, probably about midnight. Along this road, there is an access road that runs mostly parallel to the interstate and veers off at an overpass every now and then. When the road veers off, the overpass, which is usually tall enough to let the tractor trailers through, has a pretty steep incline of dirt and concrete forming the hill. You know what I'm talking about, right? Anyway, I'm driving down the road, sort of caravanning with my friend, except he was about 10 miles back because he stopped somewhere to get gas, so he was far behind me. I noticed there's a car driving at the same speed as me on the access road, veering off at every overpass until I can't see him anymore, and then speeding back up and driving alongside me again and again. At first, I'm sort of worried because I think it's a cop. I had a gram with me, but I hadn't yet gotten a chance to smoke it yet. At one point, the car once again veers off and then back parallels with me until he just takes off, going well over 100 miles an hour. I'm sure because I was already going around 75 to 80. An overpass was coming, and I expected him to veer off again, except he didn't. He just drove straight on and ramped off the overpass, catching what looked like 15 to 20 feet of air, not to mention the height of the overpass already. I was still behind him, so I lost sight of him on the other side because I hadn't passed under the overpass just yet. But when I did pass under, I didn't see anything. Nothing at all. No wreckage, no fire, no trees, bushes, ditches, nothing. It was like it hadn't even happened. I pulled off and turned around and looked around the area, and I couldn't find any evidence. It was the weirdest thing I've ever seen. But the weirder part is that my friend told me he saw the same car doing the same thing when he got to that stretch of road, only he never saw the car commit suicide like I did. Back in the early, mid-1970s, my mother and I lived in the Pacific Northwest. I was about 6 years old at the time. We were on an offbeat road right out of Seattle. Very dark night, no moon, and just a wisp of fog. We saw a Volkswagen Beetle on the side of the road with their emergency flashers on and a rather good-looking guy, as my mom describes him, with his arm in a sling waving us down. My mom pulled over, being the kind woman that would help anybody in need, and he looked fairly normal. My mom rolled down her window and asked if she could help, and the guy asked my mom if she could help him get the last lug nut off his tire so he could change his flat. So my mother introduces herself and said, "Hello, my name is Ted," and then smiled and then looked at me and reached over and shook my hand and asked me my name. I think I got bad vibes as well, but I didn't say anything to him. My mom said something about his smile really made her uncomfortable, and then she noticed that he was missing the passenger seat in his Beetle. So she rolls the windows back up and said she would call a tow truck to come help him at the next city, and then speeds away while looking in the rearview mirror. She sees him taking off the sling and getting back in the Beetle, and took off very fast in the opposite direction. So that's the night at 6 years old that I met Ted Bundy. My sister worked about an hour and a half away from my mom's, well, where she was temporarily staying at least, at this time, which was bad because she's had a bad habit of falling asleep in cars. So, on nights that she worked really, really late, I made her promise to call me, and I'd stay up and talk to her until she got home. One night late, I'm on the phone with her, and out of nowhere, she starts screaming. She finally gets out of semblance of a sentence, telling me there was a girl covered in blood, crawling out of the ditch onto the road. She pulls the car back around and jumps out of the car and runs to her, the phone falling on the ground. I'm still intently listening. I hear the girl start sobbing and telling her, "Oh God, not you. I need help. They're coming back for me." My sister at this point thinks the girl might have a mental issue because of how frantic and disconnected her thoughts are, and because while she keeps saying she needs help, she doesn't seem to think my sister could help her. In hindsight, I think the girl saw my 5'9", 100-pound sister with her high-pitched voice and thought that they could easily kill her too. From there, Besides screaming and broken glass, I can only tell it from her side. She sees this truck pulling up and is about to wave them down when the girl goes crazy and starts clawing and pleading with my sis to run. The truck puts on its brights and two very big men jump out of the car and start walking towards them, making clicking cat-calling sounds, and my sister's blood turns to ice. She reaches over and grabs the girl, and in a whirlwind manages to force her into the car and jump in herself before the men reach the car and start smashing her lights. She speeds off, clipping one of them, and is followed by this truck trying to run her off the road for about a half an hour. They only pull away when she reaches a hospital. Inside, the girl was in a panic and wouldn't let my sister leave with the doctors. She kept saying that she was her best friend and repeating her name over and over. From the doctors, my sister learned that this girl was repeatedly raped and then tied up and drugged behind the truck. To add to the creepiness, once my sister got home, she looked at her name tag and remembered that she had left hers at home and had borrowed an ex-employee's tag. Stephanie. And yet, despite my sister saying that she didn't recall ever not fearing for her life enough to get formalities and exchange names, the girl had called her by her real name. I have been searching for a news link, but I haven't found anything. My sister never testified. She did give the cops her clothes, and they did process her car. This was in the greater Houston area, and I believe it was fall of 2010. I showed my sister this, and she is touched by all the comments, but added that it was much more terrifying for the girl, because although my sister was thinking about saving her, not the consequences of doing so necessarily. That being said, we both, but especially my sister, would like to know the end of the story as much as you would. If anyone knows any more information on this, please let us know. I was driving a shortcut from 29 Palms, California to Albuquerque, New Mexico. 29 Palms is located in the desolate high desert east of Los Angeles. The shortcut was all two-lane road through total nothingness, except for passing through Amboy, California. Amboy is a nearly abandoned town nearly as far below the sea level as Death Valley, with a dormant volcano and lava field on one side and a salt flat on the other. It was also, at the time, a hot spot for satanic group activity. So I was driving by myself in the afternoon. I stopped in Amboy and snapped a picture of the city sign just to prove I was there to friends who dared me to take that route to I-40. I got back in my car and proceeded to drive up into the mountain range between Amboy and I-40. Once I reached the top, I am driving north through a canyon with high grass on both sides of the road. Up ahead, I see some stuff in the middle of the road. As I approach, I slow down to see a red Pontiac Fiero stop sideways across both lanes, a suitcase open with clothes scattered everywhere, and two bodies laying face down on the road, a man and a woman. I stop 100 or so feet away, and the hair on the back of my neck is standing up. Being a Marine, I reach under the seat and pull out a 9mm pistol, and I chamber around. Something seemed wrong. It looked too perfect, as it were staged. An ambush? Was I being paranoid? Something was wrong. Getting out of the car seemed unthinkable. It was the horror movie move. As I scanned the road, I saw a line I could drive, past the guy in the road on his left, swerve to the right side of the woman, behind the Fiero, and I'd be on the other side. I dropped into first gear, punched it, and drove the line I planned. I passed the back of the car without hitting it, or either of the bodies in the road. I continued forward a couple hundred feet, and slowed down just so I could breathe, and let my heart slow down a little. As I looked up into the rearview mirror, I saw that the two bodies had gotten up to their knees, and 20 or so people emerged from the tall grass on either side of the road by the car and bodies. At that moment, my right foot smashed the gas pedal to the floor and did not let up until I had to slow down for the I-40 East on-ramp. I will never know what happened to me had I gotten out of the car to check on the bodies or stopped my car closer to them. Somehow, I do not think it would have been good. Sometimes real life can be much scarier than a movie ever will be. The most disturbing thing that's ever happened to me was on a long drive back to college for my last semester before graduation. I am a night person and was leaving kind of late for the drive, but was expecting to get in around midnight. Being that I would like to be living on my own after school, I was feeling a bit sentimental as it felt like I was leaving home for the last time. Home was somewhere else now. So it's sunset as I'm driving towards the highway, and there's a beautiful low fog in the fields along the road catching the light. I decide around then that it'd be nice to try for a more scenic backroads route than the typical turnpike stuff, so I decide to cut off towards West Virginia. I stop at a diner, get gas, and then proceed towards WV Line as night falls. This is the last human contact I make for the rest of the drive. I didn't foresee it, but an immense, dense fog drooped over Appalachia that night, slowing my drive considerably. At some points in the mountains, there was scarcely 10 or 15 feet of visibility. But there are some small towns the road leads me through. It's Friday night though, and it begins to feel oddly dead in each town I pass through. It'd be 9 or 10 p.m., and the local bars would look closed. There were no lights on in any of the houses. I felt uneasy, but maybe that's just how it was there. Anyway, I'm making terribly slow progress with the fog and the backroads at night. Deer sightings keeping my foot a little light when the fog wasn't too bad. But at some points, I'd have to nose my way through foggy intersections, unsure if I'd find the other side. It was almost impossibly dense at times, and the trip would take double the estimated time to arrive because of it. I'm often driving around 25 miles an hour, or worse, trying to be safe, and it's around 2 in the morning, and there's no cell service as I get into a large national forest. There's no other traffic around, and there has been little all night. So I decide to pull over to pee, leaving the engine on for whatever reason. It'd be a quick stop. I'm not fearless by any means, but I try not to let myself get too jumpy in the woods at night. But as I'm coming around the car, undoing my belt, I hear voices, maybe 40 or 50 yards into the forest. And then there's scrambling through the dead leaves and brush, coming in my direction. It's pitch black outside. No streetlights or houses. National forest, cloudy, foggy, and a starless, moonless night. I can't see anything off the road beyond the view of the red glow of the taillights. Feeling sufficiently freaked out and not willing to find out more, I bolt back to the driver's side and floor it up the next hill, happy I had left the car on anyway. My heart is pounding, and I never find out more about this little scare, and I'm glad for that. A little while longer, I'm heading up some steep mountains and nearing an old fire watchtower from the World War II days. There's a plaque that's roughly about it being a community morale builder, to have built it even if it didn't affect the war in any way. I pulled into the overlook to actually pee because I never got the chance earlier. Now that I'm atop a sizable mountain, I suddenly get cell service and a string of concerned texts from my mom freaking out asking if I made it okay. By this time, I should have been at my house hours ago, but I took a long and unfamiliar way in the dark and intense mist. Knowing that she won't go to sleep until I'm there, I responded that I'm safely home, hoping that it will end it. She immediately calls me and asks where I am, and I can't really ignore her call having just texted her. I tell her I'm at home and she asks, In Virginia? And I say yeah, in my college town, despite being on top of a mountain in a national forest in West Virginia. She sounds deeply unsettled and says she's been trying to call me repeatedly while I had no service. I ask why, and she says she got a really weird phone call from West Virginia. But way West Virginia where you should have been, which is actually where I was. She said she got this phone call, and a gruff young man with a backwoods-sounding voice was telling her he needed to speak to my name, and swearing at her and saying all these nasty things. She said she heard people in the background screaming and people laughing. She hung up and called me a few times, but it went straight to voicemail. She typed the number in Google and saw it was from West Virginia, and I knew I was at least passing through a small part of it and called the number back. A small child answered and swore at her, and then earlier the voice ripped the phone back and started saying my name again and saying that he needed to speak to me. This is especially strange because I was driving my dad's car and I'm not registered in it, so even if they were to somehow saw my license plates and could run them, they'd get his name. I think I even paid with cash at the diner and gas station way back near the start of the drive 5+ hours earlier and in another state. I can't think of anything I could have dropped with my name on it when I had stepped out of the car briefly earlier during the recent incident. I still had all my cards, my ID. It would be an incredibly strange coincidence or extremely elaborate prank either way. I do my best to reassure my mom I have no idea what that could be about, and that it must be a weird coincidence. I tell her I'm at my house and I'm okay, despite how troubling I find all this is in reality. She gives me a half-hearted okay, and I tell her goodnight. I pull out of the watchtower and pull off and continue into Virginia. Never have I been so comforted by a 3 a.m. dregs of late-night parties, students stumbling home at a nearby university town off a highway I know well from my usual route. I carry on to the highway and make it safely, and things have been completely normal since, but have never brought it up with my mom again, nor have I ever had the heart to tell her where I was driving that night, or how late, or the voices in the woods. There's no climax, no resolution. I'm just trying to forget.